morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the webinar series, World Economic Series, which is jointly sponsored by Public Policy Projects, which I chair, and the Diplomat magazine, which is a magazine which circulates in the London diplomatic community, has done so since 1947. This series of webinars is a conscious attempt by Public Policy Projects and the Diplomat to promote an international discussion around the public policy issues which are posed by the COVID crisis and the requirement for us to plan an international response to the COVID crisis, not just around the health issues, but around the economic challenges that it poses to every country in the world. We were delighted at our launch webinar last week to be joined by the Lord Mayor of London, and we're even more delighted today to be joined by the Ambassador from Japan to London and by the Special Advisor to the Japanese government on digital questions, which will be, of course, at the very heart of any coordinated international response to COVID crisis and rebuilding open international trade and international economic relations. We're also joined this morning by 35 heads of mission from the London diplomatic community. So we hope that we're developing our purpose of promoting discussion between countries, but in particular through diplomatic means, ensuring that we build through our diplomatic relationships a real understanding of what is going on and how individual countries are responding to the challenges posed by COVID. A couple of housekeeping points before we start. Please, I think we're all learning in the new Zoom generation, the basic etiquette of joining a Zoom webinar is to keep ourselves on mute until asked to speak. And so I'd ask everyone please to keep themselves on mute. Secondly, our guests are going to contribute to the beginning of this webinar, but the purpose of the webinar, having heard what they have to say, is then to promote discussion. So please, if you wish to participate in the discussion, indicate through the chat function that you wish to do so, and we would particularly welcome contributions from members of the London diplomatic community to promote the kind of discussion that I've been describing. And the third thing to say is that although the initial presentations will be published through PPP and through the Diplomat, the discussion after the initial contributions will be subject to the Chatham House rule, which, as every diplomat will tell you, means that the contributions and the points of view can be reported, but they cannot be attributed to the individual speaker. So with those points of introduction, I'd like now to welcome very warmly to this World Economic Series webinar His Excellency Yasumasa Nagamine, who is the Japanese ambassador to London. Yasumasa served in Delhi, he served in Washington, he served in London, and he served in the Prime Minister's office in Japan. So he's an authoritative senior diplomat. And Ambassador, we're looking forward very much to what you have to say to us.
Well, thank you very much, Right Honorable Steve Darrow. I should call you Steve, if I may.
Please do. Everybody else does.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me as a speaker in this webinar entitled Rebooting the World Economy. And my thanks go to all the sponsors of this seminar. I'm so much honored to be part of these events. So I would like to talk about some the topics concerning Japan and the pandemic situation. So let me first illustrate the situation of Japan in terms of the pandemic. Japan has been affected by the novel coronavirus from a very early part of this year, even earlier than the widespread infections in Europe. You remember that the corona infection case on board the Diamond Princess, the cruise ship anchored at Yokohama port in February, Japan had faced with the need for very acute response to this new virus, even before the WHO called the virus as pandemic. And in fact, this experience gave a very important lesson to our health systems. Hence, we were able to nail down the spread of virus coming from Wuhan, China at an early stage. Next wave arrived mainly from the United States and Europe, from the rest of the world. And we have fought against the widespread of virus with great efforts. The Japanese government issued a declaration of a state of emergency in April, which we managed to lift on May 25th, only after 6 weeks, thanks to very voluntary and restrictive attitude shown by the people in Japan. The number that stands at present 18,000 accumulated virus positive cases and less than 1,000 deaths out of the pandemic in Japan. Compared to the average death toll in the winter and the spring season, this year's figure has shown no difference. So there seems no hidden or unreported death cases by coronavirus beyond already reported number. The coronavirus recognizes no nationalities, no borders, yet we may say that in Japan we have so far contained the virus spread relatively effectively. There may be some reasons, talked about behind that outcome. Well, firstly, in Japan, those who have symptoms have had an easy access to doctors, and then got the initial medical treatment. That kind of system, health system, sort of prevented the patient to develop serious health conditions later. And secondly, it is said that the people are very conscious about the way of life, hygiene and health conscious attitude, like washing hands is a common thing, and wearing mask in winter season also is a very common practice in Japan. And thirdly, more importantly, we have made very rigorous efforts to trace contacts of a person, a corona positive person, to other people in order to stop to grow the clusters later. And in May, last month, in May, we have made all those who have close contact with infected people eligible for PCR testing, even if showing no symptoms. This test and trace method has been effective, and then we believe that it is going to be effective in preventing a second or third waves of infections in future too. Finally, we have taken rather strict measures of the incoming or coming back Japanese people, and also the foreign visitors at the airports. All the people coming to Japan are under PCR testing and then required 2 weeks quarantines. This is mandatory. And we continue to have entry restrictions of foreign nationals from virus-affected countries and regions. For the time being, it will continue to do that way. But anyway, we will encounter many challenges in the second or third waves in future. Therefore, it is very, very important for us to share information and experience and then work together for the final containment of the virus worldwide. So that's the situation in Japan with regard to the coronavirus. And then let me turn to the economy. And this pandemic seriously paralyzed the world economy. Immediate shrink of demands, supply, income expectations, job security, investment sentiments, all affected. The depth of damage may differ according to the situation of restrictions or national lockdowns. Japan, as I said, had an emergency situation, but it was 6 weeks and relatively short. But still, we have witnessed that first quarter of this year had a 2.2% minus growth. And the second quarter may be even worse. As you all know, IMF forecast is minus 5.8% for Japan in 2020, and maybe 2.4% positive in 2021. Yet, our economic policy response has been also very unprecedented. Most recently, as of June 12, we have decided to outlay another supplementary budget to enable the second economic package of 117 trillion Japanese yen, namely 1.1 trillion US dollar. Combined with the earlier economic package of April 30th, the total of 200 trillion Japanese yen, meaning 1.86 trillion US dollar, has been already in place. So we have a very, very robust economic emergency measures been taken. And this is addressed to two phases. One, of course, is the emergency support. And the second one is for achieving a V-shaped recovery out of this pandemic. And there are emergency support side. We are putting an emphasis on secure employment and cash management support to business, and direct financial support for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and also self-employed people. And also support directly households by cash payments of 100,000 yen per person. And also we have a tax reduction and tax deferral measures also in the package. On the side of the V-shaped recovery, this is very, very important. And we have focused on the following areas. First, supporting the seriously affected sectors: tourism, transportation, restaurants, and entertainment sectors. Those are severely affected by pandemic. So we have a focus on those areas. And also the local economy is very, very important to recover. So we will increase the subsidy to the local governments to support local industries, especially the primary industries, agriculture, fisheries, and so forth. And also the local tourism also be promoted. And thirdly, I will come back to this important area later, but maintaining a free trade and pursuing free trade agreements, this is another focus. At the same time, very resilient supply chains is very important. We have witnessed the weakness of these supply chains, so that we should keep an eye on the need for the important supply domestically, domestic manufacturing and supply chains also need to be attended. And the next one is especially the Japanese businesses are in a very difficult period, so that the government will support their activities, not only domestic activities, but also the overseas operations. And another important area is digital transformation, which will be perhaps discussed by Naoki later. And teleworking is a very commonplace in Japan too. And these new technology, digital transformation, need to be very well utilized by small and medium-sized enterprises, and also the public and education sector as well. And finally, public investment by way of fiscal measures need to be very much mobilized in order to induce private sector investment to follow at this time. And so let me talk about the trade side. It is very obvious that with the need for the global economic recovery, the role of trade is very, very important. Protectionist measures only aggravate the situation. You cannot, change or destroy the global supply chains already in place because of this situation. Rather, we should improve the functioning of the supply chain networks for promoting stable and effective supply. Japan and the UK are both committed to free trade principles, and it should be very much fitting to see that the both nations are entering into new trade relations based on a free trade agreement at this very important time. We look forward to a very good and effective negotiation with the UK partners and to building solid trade relations based on the conviction that the free trade is good for us, for our two countries, but good for the rest of the world as well. And also, I'd like to point out that the UK is the largest Japanese investment destination in Europe. And the Japanese businesses have established very effective supply chains among Japan, UK, and Europe. So the future course of action between UK and EU also is a very prime concern of the concern and the interest of the Japanese businesses here in the UK. We really hope that the UK will continue to be a great trade partner with Japan, as well as a very welcoming host nation of the Japanese investment to this country. Finally, digitalization. This is a very important major task of economic policy in Japan, even before pandemic. Society 5.0, this is the kind of a concept of the society and the business and the economy utilizing fully the digitalization so that we would have a very rich and a very effective way of life and business in the coming years. So the pandemic situation has simply underlined the urgent need to accelerate such process. And then at this time, the government has identified 4 areas under the pandemic situation. First is the promoting telework in government sector and also the SME sector. And second focus is the achieving the goal of distant learning and the new way of education and teaching at schools and the universities using the digitalization. And thirdly, medical service and health service also we are focusing on introducing more sort of digital technique and the method. For example, distant medical services and so forth. And finally, government sector services need to be much more digitalized. And we have a traditional way of using seal, hanko, in producing the documents, but the digitalization is very much in need for the areas. So all in all, I'm sorry I have talked too much. A very important lesson out of the coronavirus is that we really need international cooperation, working together to address pandemic. I hope that new method of communication like this and we will be able to work together for the common goals of controlling virus better. We talked much about building back better. Certainly, we are under such concept of building back better. Thank you very much.
Yasumasa, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. And to our British audience, it will certainly have been very much focusing the mind to hear that Japan can say that its response to coronavirus has meant that there have been no excess deaths in Japan as a result of coronavirus. That is an extraordinary achievement and doesn't compare. It means that it compares extremely favorably, clearly, with our own in the UK, but also, in fairness, with others elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere in the world as well. We will, I suspect, come back to that, but I'd like to move, if I may, quickly on to Naoki Ota, who is joining us because of the capacity of digital technology from Japan, from Tokyo. He was previously the head of Asia Pacific for Boston Consulting Group in the field of digital technology, joined the Japanese government, been working for the Japanese government since 2015, and is now the digital and technology advisor to the government of Japan. So I can think of no one better to describe to us what is going on in Japan and in the Far East in terms of the development of digital technology as part of the what I hope, would like to believe, will be a global response. Naoki, you're extremely welcome. We look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I think it's the best season in the UK, and unfortunately in Japan it's a rainy season, so it's not so pleasant to be here. So having had an overview of what's been happening from Nagamine-san, the ambassador, let me give you some specific moves in terms of how we want to deploy digital technologies to live with the COVID-19, as well as to build our society after the pandemic. Let me start with an article on FT. Yuval Harari, the author of *Sapiens* and *Homos*, wrote the article concerning the world after coronavirus on FT, I guess in March. I believe many of you read it. He told us basically we face two important choices during the pandemic. The first is between totalitarian surveillance and the citizen empowerment. The second choice is between nationalist isolation and global solidarity. In my view, digital technologies, in particular smart city solutions, are in a very critical situation in making those two choices. There are no one-fits-all answer, and many trials, as you can see, are underway. I'd like to share what's going on in Japan. Before talking about Japan, globally, I think there are two strong schools promoting smart cities. One is China. They developed a total solution package called City Brain, which allows you to optimize city activities, including transportation, energy, and healthcare, police, and so on. And China has been very, very aggressive to export their smart city solutions. And today, we see a few showcases outside China. For example, Kuala Lumpur decided to install City Brain last year. I suspect other cities, not only in Asia, but in Africa, will follow this move. The other school is GAFA. I won't go into details today, but you may have read an article which said that Google, or Sidewalk, which is a business unit of Google developing and promoting smart city solutions, announced it gave up this project in Toronto, Canada. There are many issues we can discuss on these two schools, but one thing which I'd like to draw your attention is data ownership. In other words, who owns and controls data. So now talking about Japan, so this year, the government enacted a bill to create and promote smart cities. We will call them super cities, which aim to enhance inclusive growth by deploying digital technologies and implementing regulatory reforms. There is one condition to be selected as a super city, which is citizen participation. I expect citizens are going to have data ownership, the controlling data in super cities. Citizen participation in digital transformation and in digital technologies has been very active in Japan recently. A movement called civic tech was getting popular, in my view, in the late 2000s globally. Civic tech empowers citizens to solve social issues by deploying digital technologies. So in Japan, during the pandemic, the Tokyo Metropolitan City partnered with a civic tech group and launched web services, which allow you to see what's happening and change your behaviors. The more than 400 citizen engineers, including many teenagers, participated to develop and operate web services, and more than 4 million citizens use that services. Let me share the screen, if I may, so that you can see the website. Okay.
It's worked.
Is it working?
Yes, it is.
So this is a site, and you can choose language, and you can see what's happening, like the test positives or changes of number of newly patients, or the commuting, the how many people are using the subway, and etc. And these data is open data, so the public and private and the social sectors can use data on these web services in their services. And the website was developed for only 3 days. And when developing this Chinese version, the Audrey Tang, the IT minister in the Taiwanese government, joined the development. Why she did it? Because she was a member of the civic tech community. What's more, web services were built by open source, meaning that everyone can contribute to and use programs. In Japan, more than 30 prefectures and cities use the open source programs and build their own web services. The other thing is that the Japanese government worked with the civic tech community in developing a COVID-19 contact tracing application, which I believe is a pressing issue in the UK as well. A global community where we can discuss technical and policy issues is being developed. We are still facing quite a few challenging issues, but having experienced these initiatives in Japan, I am seeing some positive signs. The digital technologies are deployed to tackle challenging social and economical issues in association with citizen empowerment. So I'd like to stop here, and I'm glad to have questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Naoki, thank you very much indeed for that overview and the focus that you place on smart cities and the choice between, and the very clear choice that you started off by talking about between, on the one hand, the choice between authoritarian and liberal government, and on the other, between nationalist and globalist approaches to dealing with it. That's, of course, precisely the background that led us to set up this series of webinars.